And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Dr. Robert Schoch. Robert, why did we lose the knowledge? What happened? I mean, there's no question the construction occurred many, many years ago, but why did we lose the transition to find out how this was done?
Oh, well, I think a good analogy would be the Dark Age of Europe, where the Greeks and the Romans had incredible knowledge, incredible engineering, etc., and essentially society collapsed beginning in the 5th century A.D., and a lot was lost during the Dark Ages and Middle Ages. So I'm using this analogy to go back further in time, and I was talking before the break about the concept of a solar-induced dark age, and exactly the same type of thing happened, but I think at a much greater scale, that you had this early civilization some 12,000 years ago. We have only glimmerings of how sophisticated they were, how much knowledge they may have had. Maybe if we open that archive under the Sphinx, we'll learn a lot more. We don't know. But they seem to have been very sophisticated, but there were these major catastrophes on Earth caused by the sun. The ultimate result was from a solar outburst, or the ultimate causative factor was a solar outburst, and society just fell apart. And in any society, you only have a few people who really have sophisticated knowledge in particular areas. So just to give a classic example, but for everyone to think about this, if something happened to our society today, let's say there's another solar outburst, and there will be one, and electronics are wiped out, communication systems.
Right, everything's fried. Everything gets fried.
You and I don't know about you, but I don't know how to build a computer from scratch.
Not me either.
If I did, there's no infrastructure to support it. It doesn't take much once you've got a very sophisticated civilization to cause damage to it, because there's so many interconnected parts, if you would, and so many people with specialized knowledge, and you lose one group, and it can have a domino or cascading effect.
Absolutely. Might there have been another catastrophe, too, like the flood of Noah?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I think the flood of Noah ties right in with this. And so it's not necessarily another catastrophe, but another aspect of the general catastrophe I'm talking about. Because when you have a major solar outburst, something that happens, and this was the end of the last ice age, is you have what's known as plasma, or electrically charged particles moving at incredible speeds, good percentage of the speed of light. It penetrates the atmosphere. It hits ice. Think of like huge lightning bolts hitting glaciers. It melts them really quickly, vaporizes them. When it hits water, and of course our planet is 70% water, it hits water, it evaporates it. This puts incredible amounts of moisture into the atmosphere. The atmosphere can only maintain so much moisture before it has to fall out. So we actually have evidence of torrential rains at the end of the last ice age, incredible flooding. This is probably the rain that initiated the weathering and erosion on the Sphinx. But we have these accounts of these huge floods, huge flash floods, rising sea levels, all of this combined. We have evidence from around the world, both geological evidence and traditions, myths, if you want to call them, but myths that are based on, things that really happened, of flooding around the world, including Noah's flood. So I think it all ties together very cogently.
Robert, this hour's going to fly by. Let's go to the calls. David in Hilo, Hawaii, welcome to the show. Hi, David.
Oh, hi. Good evening. How are you?
Good. Good to have you with us.
It's a very interesting discussion, and I find all aspects of it very interesting. I've got two quick questions. Because you have historical evidence of a solar event that we should be concerned about today, wiping out our EMT, is there governmental officials or agencies working on protecting our infrastructure from that? And the second question came up just as you were talking. I'm wondering if the extinction of dinosaurs was due to a solar event rather than a meteorite?
Robert, let me answer the first question. At this point, there is no official government agency working on protecting our power grid from a solar flare or an EMP attack in the atmosphere. We've talked about this many times on the program, and there have been some great people, the late Peter Pride and Bill Forston, trying to get this thing done, but officially nothing's being done. But go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, no, I was going to say exactly the same thing. Officially, nothing's being done. There have been sort of people pushing for this and initiation of it. Obama, and I'm not making any political statement, but as Obama was leaving, he actually brought this to attention that something should be done. But no, it's a horrible situation, I think, from a governmental point of view, where there's such short-sightedness, if I could put it that way. And this is something that could happen at any time, literally. And I don't mean to be an alarmist, but we should be paying attention to this.
That's right. And David, tell us about that dinosaur question again.
Yeah, as you were talking, I wondered, a lot of things can be attributed to solar events in history that you're talking about. And I know we all believe that, well, most of us believe the extinction of dinosaurs are due to a meteorite, but maybe it was more of a solar event. Is that possible?
Yeah, the classic view of the dinosaurs 65, 66 million years ago is that, when I say classic, I have lived through when this was first proposed and people were laughing at it, but it's now incredible amount of evidence that, yes, there was a major extinction from some extraterrestrial event. And the classic view now over the last, since late 1980s, is that it was a huge asteroid or a huge meteorite. They sort of blur together, and that we even have the crater in the Yucatan Peninsula. And, the evidence is pretty strong for that, but let me say that when you have a major solar event, major plasma discharges, they can create craters also. And it may not be as simple as one or the other. They could actually be associated together. There is some evidence that when you have major asteroids coming into the inner solar system, if some of them impact the sun, that may destabilize it to cause solar events, that we could have had a situation where, yes, an asteroid, a physical impactor, hit Earth, but that was associated with major solar events too, major solar outbursts. So it's really hard to reconstruct something 12,000 years ago, much less 65, 66 million years ago. But I do think it's important that we consider the possibility of solar events, either in part or in whole, for a lot of these things that have been in the past attributed simply to meteorites or asteroids. In fact, this brings up the bigger issue that work now that's being done on many fronts indicates that evidence, for instance, shocked quartz and cratering and where no silicious spherules, all kinds of evidence that has generally been assumed to be meteoritic or evidence of meteorites and comets and asteroids can also be formed by intense lightning strikes, intense solar strikes. So it's a whole new field that I think we have to consider. And when you have situations where you don't even have a crater, I think the first thing you need to look at is solar events. So I think we have to leave the possibilities open when it comes to the extinction of dinosaurs.
International line, Don, Alberta, Canada. Hello, Donald. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, Robert. George, I really have to thank you for having a platform that you can have people on like Robert, because locally I'd never be able to get listen to somebody like
that's what we're here for, Donnie. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I'd get kicked off if I said half the things that he said on daytime radio. There's Linda Moulton Howe did an interview. There's a pyramid in Alaska that's twice as big as the one in Egypt. If you go straight south of the pyramids in Egypt, there's ones in Antarctica, and they all have a 30-degree grid going around. I believe that, and then you had Richard C. Hoagland on. He was talking about, a long time ago, he was talking about equivalent to the Sphinx in America, but he wouldn't disclose the location because he was worried about damage being done to it. But the one thing that I can't understand is why is it, if it has to do with the magnetic fields between the Earth and the Sun or what it is, but why is it that if we can't accept the fact that, let's say, the Egyptian people, why can't they accept the fact that they were far more advanced before and maybe civilization fell because of some of the catastrophic events that happened? Why can't we accept the fact that our civilization is older and we were more advanced, we fell, and then we kind of rebuilt? It just blows my mind. It doesn't matter if it's a Smithsonian dumping giant bones into the ocean or what it is. I can't even begin to understand why we can't accept the reality of what we see. Is it like, what blocks the consciousness? Is it the magnetic fields? Is it black? I can't wrap my brain around that. Anyway, that's kind of my question.
All right, good question. Why argue, Robert, with the fact that things could be much older than they think?
I think there's a couple of issues going on here. We have a tradition now of about 100-plus years that, and I don't want to bash it too much, but evolutionary tradition, and a lot of people interpret that as everything gets better and better. Civilization, when applied to civilization, is progressive, that we have to essentially be the best thing that there ever was on Earth. And I find there's incredible resistance in some circles, and when I say some circles, I'm talking academic circles, to the concept that ancient people could actually know things that we don't know, that they could actually have knowledge and wisdom that we have lost since then. I mean, there's this very strong, and I think it's sort of psychological resistance to the notion that we aren't the best thing that there ever was on Earth. I was amazed when I first got involved in ancient Egypt and going to Egyptological conferences and talking to Egyptologists, that so many Egyptologists would devote their life to studying ancient Egypt, but at the same time, I could see they were basically laughing at the ancient Egyptians and saying, ha, 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 well, they had some nice art and they could build a few good temples and pyramids, but these are really stupid, primitive people, worshiping their concept of gods with human bodies and animals' heads, and we're studying them, and we know so much more than them, and this real hubris. So I think a lot of it is sort of psychological from that point of view, that people just don't want to admit that we are not the greatest thing that there ever was on Earth, and that there could have been ancestors, there could have been people ahead of us. Also, I hate to digress, but I wanted to go back to the dinosaurs. I forgot to mention that we now have evidence that stars like our sun and probably our sun itself can undergo micronovas where it throws out literally physical debris as well as charged particles. So that might tie in, too, with something like the extinction of the dinosaurs.
Good point. First-time caller Keneal in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Keneal.
Hi, how's it going, George?
Good, my friend. Thanks for calling.
Good. I just wanted to thank both you and the doctor here for putting out such amazing information. You guys have truly changed so many lives. And for me personally, Mr. Norrie, it was the Coast to Coast episode with Robert Bivol that really got me into the Sphinx.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And my question for the doctor is, do you think that sound and vibrational frequencies play any part in anything to do with the Sphinx?
Oh, yeah, I think so. And actually, this ties in with the last caller, too, who was talking about consciousness and geomagnetic fields. There's a lot of evidence that very subtle changes in the geomagnetic field, the geomagnetic environment, and the sound environment, including at sound levels that we don't physically, when I say we're physically attuned to them, but we don't consciously hear them, say at very low frequencies, can affect our mentality, can affect our thinking, can affect our health. And there's evidence not so much around the Sphinx itself, but in the Great Pyramid, for instance, that the chambers reverberate and they shield from certain electromagnetic frequencies. They have very strong acoustic properties. So I don't know if you've been to Egypt and been in the Great Pyramid, but when you go into the Great Pyramid, for those who haven't, if you go in there quietly and focus on it, you can, and I've experienced this many times, and many other people independently have, you can start to sort of absorb and feel. I'm not sure, it's hard to put into words, but you can feel the changes. You can feel the difference, especially down in the subterranean chamber where it really filters out all the electromagnetic frequencies and vibrations, and sound and electromagnetics tie in together at that level with the rocks, and it basically filters everything out except for the very long wave, low frequency, if people know what Schumann resonances are, and it can really be very healthy from a brain point of view, a consciousness point of view. So I think there's a very strong aspect to that. This has also been demonstrated for a number of other ancient sites around the world, from things like the various barrows, the various underground dolmens or chambers, should we say, various Irish burial chambers, what are known as burial chambers, which actually have incredible resonance properties, or at Malta, a lot of the temples there. There was some early work until it was cut off by the Turkish government of the same type of thing at Göbekli Tepe, that the pillars may resonate there. There's evidence, and I'm quite convinced by this, that the obelisks of Egypt may actually resonate at a frequency that has an effect, or did originally, and a lot of them are now broken and have been repaired, but they had resonant qualities. So, yeah, this is an important consideration that it's well beyond the bounds of many traditional academics.
Robert, my late father was born in Cairo back in 1923.
Oh, wow, 100 years ago.
We're not Egyptian, but his mother and father were headed somewhere, and
Wow, that's great. And my colleague and friend, and we wrote a book together, Origins of the Sphinx, Robert Bouval, of course, he was born in Alexandria.
That's exactly right. Robert, we're going to take a short break and come back with final calls with you in just a moment on Coast to Coast. Dr. Robert Schoch with us. His website is his name, linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. Those of you on hold, we'll do our best to get to all of you. George Norrie here with Dr. Robert Schoch. Our final segment here. Let's go to the phones. Eric, truck driving in Indianapolis. Hello, Eric.
Hello, George. Hey, great guest tonight.
Yes, sir.
What is his name again?
Dr. Robert Schoch.
Dr. Robert Schoch. Glad to meet you, Doctor. Got a question for you. Got a comment, really, but it seems to me like that we would have something in place, some kind of a program for the EMP attack, being since China is pumping out all this technology, and just wondering if China may have something like that in place for an attack.
I have not heard of that. Have you, Robert?
I heard about it all, but of course we don't know exactly what China's doing. They tend to be pretty secretive.
Exactly.
No, I've heard nothing about it.
Norm in St. Louis, welcome to the program. Go ahead, Norm.
Hey, great show again.
Thank you, sir.
I got a question for the guest. He kind of eliminated the alien type help or whatever, which maybe I'm thinking he might be thinking aliens as in, putting them in a box as in a 100-pound little green lizard person, as opposed to maybe angelic, because I've seen hieroglyphics on Egypt where, they got the jackal head on a human, which is the god of the underworld, and angels and whatnot. So I guess my point is, those rocks or stones were 10 to 20 tons each, and maybe a couple million of them to build it, and I don't know how high they are, a couple 100 feet or whatever. Think of all I can't lift a car, and 20 tons is like maybe the size of a house or several school buses. You're talking hundreds of people to lift just one. And how many injuries? You pull a groin, you hurt your back, you break your finger, you fall off. They couldn't have used women and kids. So you get where I'm going to. It seems to me logical that maybe there was some divine intervention with angelic type of things, or someone with God knowledge that imparted ways to move these things without the use of cranes and bobcats and whatnot.
All right, well, let's get Dr. Schoch's opinion. By the way, the Great Pyramid is about 481 feet tall. It's pretty good sized.
It's an incredible size, and you have granite blocks inside which weigh on the order of tens of tons, maybe up to 80, 90 tons or more. But even more significant, and I don't have a good answer to the question, but I want to throw something out, even more significant, when the Sphinx was carved, when the body of the Sphinx was carved, they carved out huge limestone blocks that they moved to the eastern side of the Sphinx to build what is now known as the Sphinx Temple, which is in very ruinous condition. But some of those limestone blocks weigh on the order of, say, 50 to maybe up to 100 tons. They are maneuvered into place. They were maneuvered into place in a very close confine. So when you talk about having hundreds of people, where would you put all these people? And that Sphinx Temple was constructed, I am 100% convinced, when the original body of the Sphinx was carved out. So we're talking about 10,000 BC, so even earlier than dynastic Egyptians. So I'm a geologist. I've talked to a lot of engineers, and how they constructed these structures really is perplexing. I don't have a good answer as to how it was done. I just don't know. Did they have some technology we're not familiar with? Was it divine intervention, as the caller was just suggesting? I don't have an answer. I will admit when I don't know something. I do not know how they were built.
We don't even have cranes today, I'm told, that could lift blocks.
That is correct. That is correct. And to lift something that's so huge, actually, this goes back, some people may have seen it, the documentary Mystery of the Sphinx, which John Anthony West and I were in back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And, to move one block that's not even as big as some of the largest blocks we're talking about, it takes weeks to set up a crane and counterbalances and whatnot just to move a very short distance, much less construct these incredible structures.
Let's go to Joe, Long Island, New York. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Robert. I have two questions, one on the Sphinx and one on the strangeness of Egypt. On the Sphinx, the building materials themselves, even with renovation, I don't think they could have anticipated that it would last however long it's lasted, whether it be 10,000 years or 2,500 years. And then I'm wondering if there were lakes underneath and if the Sumerian tablets had anything to say about the Sphinx.
I don't think the Sumerian tablets necessarily have anything to say about the Sphinx, but what we do have are what are known as sealings or seal impressions and inscriptions that go back now to 3,000 BC or slightly earlier, so 5,000 or so years ago. And they do, I'm convinced, carry inscriptions, or we should call it descriptions, or basically hieroglyphs that refer to the Great Sphinx, but refer to the Sphinx at that time as a lioness, a female lion, and that it was already very old, 5,000 years ago. So they do talk about it, or they do acknowledge it, the ancient Egyptians, when I say they, the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago, that this was a much older structure. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, they even talk about guarding an archive underneath, so that archive or hall of records. Now, it's hard to know. When they were first constructing it, and I would put that about 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago, did they think it was going to last this long? Did they think it was going to last for 12,000 plus years? I don't know. But they sure put a lot of time and energy into it, and they really, put a lot of work into building this structure that we now see today. I do want to mention that was working with Manu Safzadeh, my colleague, and Robert Bouval, also that it was only very recently, in the last few years, that we determined that the original references to it in the ancient Egyptian texts refer to it as lioness. For a long time, it's interesting, the ancient Egyptians, let me back up, the Egyptologists studying the ancient Egyptian inscriptions were confused as to why there was no reference to the Sphinx. Well, they were looking for essentially the wrong word, the wrong hieroglyphic, because at that time it was a lioness, and it was only later that the head was recarved into a human head. There is more about this on my website. I have an article about it for people who are interested.
Okay, let's go back to your second question, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have these things like Aladdin and the magic flying carpet, but it does seem like there was a decent amount of strangeness associated with ancient Egypt. I mean, they had monkeys as pets commonly. They had some lions as pets. They had giraffes as pets. And also the gods seem to overlap. Like I think the ancient Greeks mention Osiris and Pan in relation to Zeus. So I'd just like to ask about, I'm sure they were very advanced, but they were a little bit strange.
How strange were they, Robert?
Yeah, I think they were quite advanced. And, it's interesting because different culture, different society, say 12,000 years from now, they might acknowledge that we're advanced, but they would think we're a little bit strange too, maybe instead of the things we do and the athletics that we have and, what we revere, that type of thing. So I think part of it is that we have to not use, and this is one of my own personal opinions, that we have to not try to interpret ancient cultures, whether it's Egypt or any other culture, in using the same filter, should I say, or the same judgment values that we would judge our own society, that we have to acknowledge, yes, they were quite different from us, and so they had different values, they had different inclinations, should we say, they had different agendas and priorities, which may seem strange to us, but if we could go back in time and understand them fully, I don't think they would necessarily be quite so strange in context. And also, you bring up, the caller, you bring up something very important, that the ancient Egyptian culture and society had incredible ramifications. It had incredible influence on later Greek society and culture. It had very strong influence on Roman society and culture. And in fact, the ancient Greeks themselves and then the Romans following them acknowledged that they learned a lot from the ancient Egyptians. And the ancient Egyptians that we think of as ancient Egyptians 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, they said that they learned a lot from an earlier group of people, an earlier, should we say, civilization, which they actually referred to as Zep-Tepe. So I think this is more confirmation of that earlier, much earlier cycle of civilization that we have inherited from, that we they were basically our ancestors.
Let's go to Sean now in Stockton, California. Sean, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Good evening. I was fascinated to learn in a previous show
that the pyramids were once covered in marble. So the marble would have been both stunningly beautiful, but protected the structures from elements or even EMPs. And now that they find that minerals have additional added properties, could the marble have also acted as a planetary beacon, an energy conduit from beyond Earth, or some other benefit? Thank you.
Yeah, people speculate about that. I do want to correct. I'm a geologist, so not to be too picky, but they were coated with limestone, but a beautiful, smooth white limestone, very high quality limestone. It technically wasn't marble, but it was close to marble, and they would have shined in the sun. They were described this way even in Greek times as being incredibly smooth, shining. The casing stones, a few casing stones, that's what's known as the outer layer, a few casing stones remain on the pyramids, but most of them have been lost. They've been stripped off. They've been scavenged over the last couple of thousand years. But the few that remain, they have such high tolerances. You know, you can't slip a piece of paper between them. That's how well packed they are. So, I mean, they were incredible engineering structures, and to this day, when I say to this day, in modern times, it's known that they will attract electricity, electrical properties. You can take what's known as a Leyden jar to the top of the Great Pyramid, even in its ruinous condition, and fill it with static electricity. So, yeah, it still has these electrical properties, and there's a lot of speculation as to what exactly functions they could have served in ancient times. I suspect they were multifunctional, that they served many different functions, the least of which was a tomb. The classic Egyptological opinion is that they're just big tombs. I think that doesn't say much about the Egyptians, to just assume they are tombs.
Robert, do you think on some piece of papyrus somewhere there's the architectural schematics of the pyramids?
I think there was the architectural schematics of the pyramids on papyrus somewhere once. I have no doubt, because you're not going to build these structures just from memory or just from...
No, or talking to people saying, move these blocks here and there.
Yeah, exactly. So I suspect that there were huge piles, if you would, of papyrus with all the engineering details, probably as detailed as engineering plans that we have today for modern buildings and for computers and everything else. But whether they've survived, that's a whole nother matter. I mean, to this day, even for modern structures, a lot of times the engineering details, once the structure is built, they're lost. They're not properly archived.
Robert, thank you for being on the program, and take care of yourself, my friend. You're a national treasure.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. Always a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you.
Robert Schoch, website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Up next, we're going to talk about the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce.